Hi, my name is Tony,
And I'm Chris.
and we love pop culture. We often find ourselves discussing film, music, literature, and more, going down the rabbit hole of how everything is connected. We want to share those moments in pop culture that are seemingly unrelated but connected by just a few links. Welcome to the Pop Culture Connection. So, welcome to our first episode of the Pop Culture Connection.
Hello.
Hello. Chris is here. Something that we have wanted to do for some time now. I'm excited to talk about all things nerdy, geeky, pop culture related.
A lot of talking.
And that, which is good for a podcast.
Yeah, I think it
There's
helps.
not a lot of mime work.
Not yet.
Usually doesn't translate well, but yeah, I think interesting thoughts. It's something we do anyway when we're together. It just kind of talk about, well, then this led to this, and then this event, but then this was referenced later on in this thing, and
Yes.
so why not let everyone, or not everyone, I don't think everyone's going to hear it, but some people who listen to it will hear it.
Yes, why not let our egos just get a bit bigger than they already are?
And that's really what it's all about.
That's really what it's all about.
I think so. So basically, according to the intro in this paper that I'm looking at here, this is a podcast where we talk about all things pop culture, movies, music, video games, books, art, history, everything, because everything is connected.
Yeah, a little more in depth than that, I guess, if you can get in depth with pop culture, if it's beyond scratching the surface, because there's hundreds and hundreds of people talking about the same stuff. So how are we different? Well, we're going to dive a little deeper into the interconnectedness, the threads that tie them all together.
It's a holistic
Yeah,
podcast.
in a way.
Dirk Gently's holistic podcast.
Yeah, it's going to help you in your life figure things out.
And not just get you between everything that happens or has happened, but our own connections on an emotional level, where we kind of first heard about some of the things we'll talk about over the course of the episodes, attachments to memories that we might have, where it stands now in the zeitgeist. So today's episode, we're going to be talking about Beach Boys and Golden Girls.
Tell me more.
Two very, I think, distinct things. I think you can find some, like you said, surface level connections between those things of a certain generation.
Certainly.
Probably the medium was aimed at beaches
Beaches were big.
and tropical weather play prominently into both.
Yeah, they were a band talking about the Beach Boys that was all about girls.
That's true. They never specifically mentioned the Golden Girls, but they never didn't mention the Golden Girls either.
So, as far as we know, it could have been all about them.
Yeah, that's a good point. So you're looking at anything really, you can draw some line between them on some level, but there's more to it than that. I think that's the kind of stuff we really like to explore, talk about. The Beach Boys. From me growing up with baby boomer parents, I listened to them quite a bit. They would have the local oldies station on quite often, so I heard a lot of Beach Boys music. I know their music was featured in movies of that time.
Oh, yeah.
Flight of the Navigator, I believe,
Yeah.
was one of them. Another discussion. We're going to have a whole conversation about Flight of the Navigator. But we were maybe 9 or 10 when Cocktail came out, so Kokomo became a big hit.
I think that's the age right around where the Beach Boys grab you, where you start to say, okay, what's this? What do they got going on? I'm into surfing, or theoretically, I like the idea of it.
Right, I cannot, and I do not.
I can. However, and I don't. But vicariously through these guys, I feel like I can, and I am.
And that's important. And so that it was interesting. Just decades after their last bigger hit, to come out with this, for a movie soundtrack was such a big thing. And my connection with them was really just, through my parents and through that generation, and knowing them. They would pop up on Full House here and there. They were the neighbors or something, I think, in one episode. Or you would see them perform a live show on, if you got to stay up late somewhere. But we weren't really part of that original generation they were aimed at.
That first wave, if you will. Isn't it true that they weren't really surfers themselves? They just kind of attached to that just because it was sweeping the nation at the time.
Yeah, they kind of adopted that, but they really, I don't know if anyone else has captured really the feel and the desires of teenagers. This was the first time that the teenage voice is really getting heard in the 1960s, early 60s, and especially if you lived in California, if you're a male and your life revolved around girls and cars and surfing.
It was a simple time.
This was it. You couldn't have gotten any better than that. And I think that's so cool. Obviously, I wouldn't even say it's like a niche type thing, because they were popular. Great harmonization that they had the members, and they maintained and still do. I think they still sell a lot. They got a lot of listens and digital streaming services. So,
yeah, they were their own thing. The genre of surf rock, which they had some, but it's kind of funny because they're not really surf rock. As we know that genre of music yet.
Right. It's not like a Dick Dale or that type of, even for the most part, lyrically, though.
Sure, but they run alongside of that to some degree, maybe until they kind of look to differentiate themselves, or a few years into that, I know some of the band members kind of got tired of it, specifically Brian Wilson, and wanted to go in a different direction.
Yeah, and and that's something that for me, a lot of bands are, a mark of a good, interesting musical group is those who kind of change with the times, who will try new things, who will experiment with different sounds and don't stick to and some band, it works for them. That's who they are. They're going to play this, the same songs.
AC/DC.
AC/DC is a good example of that. That's who they are. And other bands are like, we want to experiment, we want to grow, we want to change. And I definitely think that the Beach Boys are one of them, because they had something that started in the early 60s, a Surfin' USA, and those hits. And then things like the British invasion happened, which completely changed everything.
Yeah. Bands kind of a little bit louder, more guitar-oriented kind of sound. Their image was a little rougher, and things changed drastically throughout that decade from where it was in the early 60s of just cars and girls and kind of cruising, to the late 60s where it was a whole different vibe and a whole opening and awakening of an awareness.
And still a California sound.
Certainly.
It was definitely an epicenter of a lot going on at that time. But, again, the Beach Boys didn't maintain that same level. They tried different things. You look at Brian Wilson, and you look at something like the album Pet Sounds.
Landmark album.
Oh, and it's one of those things you might not discover, if you're not of that generation like we aren't. It's something you might discover later on in life when you're kind of exploring music from the time. Just an amazing all around, very important album from start to finish. Pet Sounds was definitely one of the greatest albums of all time. Had just more mature lyrics, more experimental sound palette to it. Really a beautiful thing. Or parodied well in Walk Hard.
Yes.
Get your didgeridoos.
And just the way he went about creating that album was maybe you think of this guy as just somebody who's a guy in a band and they do songs, but I would hesitate to use divinely inspired, but that's how Brian Wilson describes it when the creation of this album sort of came to him, that he was just seeing these images in his head that were accompanied by this music, and he just had to get it out of his head.
Yeah, and that's I don't know how often that really happens anymore, if that's a thing. Some great bands out there, certainly. There's an independent music scene that is pushing things, trying new things, but this was a perfect storm of time and place for them, just as it was with other bands who would later then try concept albums and do different things with music.
Yeah, this was kind of in a ways, I know other bands had done it before, but in terms of a popular album, like you said, a concept album that hadn't really been released on the public yet. And I think it was a direct result of what the Beatles were doing. They had this unspoken little competition across the pond back and forth.
Right.
And one would hear the other do a song and they say, oh wow, listen to this, we can do something better, or we have to do better than these guys.
Well, we can try something, tweak it a little bit, which that type of rivalry that's not really a rivalry. It's just right. Challenging each other to do something different, something new and fresh, which resulted in some of the best music.
Sure, I mean, to hear them
music.
Tell it, Pet Sounds and Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band, those were inspired by each other. So without the Beach Boys and the Beatles, you wouldn't have either of those albums.
It's kind of like the Joker creating Batman and the Batman creating the Joker.
Yeah.
That's not what this episode is about. But
I created you, you created me.
Exactly. But the Beach Boys continuously they still have a good career. And I think that they will continue to. I think, their music has been put into national archives. It'll still be used in commercials and films and television shows. New generations will discover it, and I think
hopefully
that's true. We don't know. Can sometimes be an oversaturation of media, and especially with things being instant right now, unless you purposely know about it or seek it out, I don't know if you're going to hear or see some of these movies or know of these books.
Well, if you're somebody who is into vocal music, so if you're into singing with a group or harmonies, I don't see how you could overlook this group, because in terms of pure harmony, it's hard to get better than they are.
Yeah, there's not many that do it, but I watch a lot of YouTube videos about first time reacting to, and it amazes me what some of these YouTubers are reacting to for the first time. Just how is this the first time that you've encountered some of this stuff?
No, that's crazy. Yeah. What have you been watching or listening to?
Well, I know that my recent obsession is watching people react to The Exorcist for the first time, seeing it. It's hilarious every time, especially the dudes who say they're not scared of movies or disturbed by movies and then are holding a pillow tightly
They get disturbed.
About halfway through the film. It just makes me chuckle to myself.
They deserve what they get.
And what are you up to other than listening to the Beach Boys and watching Golden Girls?
Nothing. That's it. It's been my whole summer.
It's a good summer.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think that. Yeah. So starting out with the Beach Boys there, as I said, in the episode Beach Boys and Golden Girls, another phenomenon, but in a very different way. The Golden Girls, on the outer surface, there's some you can kind of see some similarities, but really there's more to it than that. For us, the Golden Girls was on new episodes. It wasn't in syndication, but it was still running live, and that was a big deal.
Yeah, I didn't think that old women had any sort of social life prior to that. It just, you thought of maybe your teacher or librarian or your great aunt as just someone who lived locked away from everybody and didn't do anything but maybe knit or read old Harlequin romance novels. Right.
We had no way to understand that especially being kids. And I know I think that's some of the genius of the creator Susan Harris. She also did Empty Nest, which is another great show, but about something that we had no frame of reference for, of being a widowed in your older age with your kids moving back into your house after they're adults, but it still found the humor in that just because of the great writing and the great performances.
Yeah, it must have resonated with a lot of people who felt that these old sassy old ladies do have something to say, or there is something at least entertaining here with watching them interact.
Yeah, and they just had that great combination of characters too. He had the really dry wit of Dorothy, Rose's stories about St. Olaf, Blanche being promiscuous, and then someone that reminds me of my own Sicilian grandmother, Sophia, just not taking shit from anybody at any time.
Tough old broad.
Yes. So definitely, and then is that's what I grew up on, watching that kind of those shows.
Yeah, it was kind of in a way. Obviously, it's a show, but you just thought all these old ladies are like this. They're spunky and full of dry wit, and maybe have an active sex life, and it's not quite the case in real life. Obviously, it's a show, but it did resonate with a lot of people, young and old.
And I think still to this day, it runs on cable. I see people post about it all the time. People who weren't alive when it was airing, they love it. Gets a lot of references in other movies and television shows.
Yeah, maybe it's something you come to later when in your life there wasn't those experiences. But later in life, we have this avalanche of media and shows, and you just kind of catch it. And now something that's happened to you, like now this resonates. Maybe you're living with your sister or your aunt or your neighbor, and now it has a completely new meaning. Whereas before, you're just like, yeah, it's just some show about some old ladies.
So, other than exploring the connections between the items, like we've said, just personal connections to pop culture. I think pop culture is very important throughout with everyone. Everyone is different of what influenced them or they have experience with. So what is your connection to either the Beach Boys or the Golden Girls?
Well, the Beach Boys have just been around. I mean, unless you've lived under a rock, you've heard the Beach Boys, whether you know it or not. And so they've just been kind of what I'd call wallpaper music for a while. It's just, you've heard them in some capacity and may not even have paid them no mind. But so just growing up in America, it's just you have to know that band. And as my musical taste became more self-aware, and then I kind of started parsing it out to like, whoa, here's this band that these guys can really lay it on thick with the harmonies and their arrangements. And like you said, Pet Sounds.
Oh, yeah.
That album, just start to finish, is a landmark album of that era. And didn't come to that till a bit later. But,
right.
You know, yeah, just growing up, your grandparents were listening to the oldies, and even when we were kids, those were considered oldies at that time. So
right.
They're just the ultimate oldies band. And then hanging around with, like, my great-grandmother, kind of that slew of shows that came out in the 80s that resulted in more women being more prominent and put in more prominent roles in the 70s. Things like Maude and
right.
Mary Tyler Moore.
Yeah.
Where people are like, yeah, women can be funny and be a showrunner, and it's that's fine. And then in the 80s you had, like you said, Empty Nest and Designing Women, and then the Golden Girls.
Murphy Brown.
My great-grandmother and my mom would watch those types of show, and it's like, well, we only had one TV, so what am I doing? I'm going to sit here and watch a show.
Yeah, there was no tablets or a laptop to go sit in your room and watch it. If you wanted to watch TV, you watched whatever was on, and even if you didn't get the jokes.
Yeah, I'd say about 75% were over my head, but you pretend you understood it, and you laughed along, and then you go back and watch it again, and then you say, oh, yeah, I do get it now.
Right. I had some, the brilliant comic timing that they had on that show and other shows of that ilk, like you were talking about. There's not much really like that anymore. I can understand why the Golden Girls shows like it still have a big following and still hold up. And they were also pretty, progressive from what I remember, dealing with issues like... and divorce and things that were taboo topics at that time.
Yeah, nothing's taboo anymore, but somebody had to tackle those issues.
You're right. And, it's like you said, as far as the Beach Boys go, pretty much similar. They're both were probably geared towards the same age group, but we were not in that age group. And, having parents and grandparents who listened to oldie stations, being familiar with the Beach Boys, that was my way of understanding them. And it was only later in life when I was getting more into understanding, how rock and roll and pop music changed over the decades, that I was able to really appreciate some of the later outings that the Beach Boys did.
Sure.
But outside of that, there's an image, I think, that the Beach Boys had. We could talk a little bit about what happened with Brian Wilson when he kind of fell into a very deep depression, had a lot of demons he was dealing with.
Being taken advantage of and manipulated by other people.
And, not knowing if he had an outlet for that anymore. They had this kind of squeaky clean image to them, but there's, all these other signs that you hear about that make you kind of take a second look at it. And I know that one of those is, one of the brothers, the Wilson brothers, who, formed the Beach Boys, had known and spent time with Charles Manson.
Yeah, Dennis Wilson.
This is just from what I'm understanding. Dennis Wilson, obviously spending time out, had a successful music career at this point. It's later in the 60s. He's driving in Malibu, and he comes across two girls.
For every guy.
That's how the song got there.
Uh-huh.
There it is.
He was living the song.
It's like, wait a minute. I know this. Two girls that were hitchhiking, and picks them up, drops them off at the destination.
Wait, what's hitchhiking? For those who
all right,
might not
so
know.
Before Uber, and you could just pull up your phone and push a couple buttons and have someone pick you up. If you wanted to be murdered by a vagrant really badly, you could stand on the side of the road and put your thumb out, and you never knew what you're going to get.
Although, we have to say that it was an effective form of transportation, and most of the time you didn't get murdered or molested.
It was just ass, gas, or grass.
Yeah, you got to point A to wherever you were going, but it has since fallen out of favor because of all the bad press that it's gotten, and rightly so.
Yeah, not really a safe practice, but these two young girls, as we will soon discover, probably not made the best or the most sound choices in their life path. And Dennis Wilson ended up running to them again later on. This time they had a conversation. He talked about his practicing with the Maharishi Mahesh Yogi, or just the Maharishi.
Transcendental meditation.
Yeah.
TM.
Big figure at the time, Indian guru, especially if you in rock and roll at that time. That was the big trend.
Everyone needed a guru.
And it really, for better or for worse, it changed things for a lot of musicians and a lot of celebrities. But the young girls also mentioned that they too had a guru.
Of sorts.
And his name was Charlie, whom they lived with on a compound.
Yeah, he sounds like a nice guy.
Charlie, there's the name Charlie brings up images of glass elevators, of chocolate factories.
It's a lot of fun.
But this Charlie, not so much. Not as they say, this guy, not my kind of guy.
No.
But Dennis Wilson ends up meeting Charles Manson. And this, obviously, before we found out what had been going on this compound.
He was just some no-name sort of drifter wannabe guru at the time. He was obviously not infamous for what was to come.
And I was, being reportedly very charismatic and having an interest in the entertainment industry, you can see how other people around that time who were into counterculture, who were into music, would share a bond with someone like that, who's living a different life, who's off the grid. There was no grid at the time, but
he was definitely off it.
He was off it.
The reservation.
Yeah. And that led to actually Charles Manson recording music with and for Dennis Wilson and the Beach Boys. He knew them, spent some time recording a few songs for them. I do know that it was a song called Cease to Exist, which is, uplifting sounding.
Now, Charles Manson wrote that song?
And Charles Manson, I don't think I have to check I think he wrote it. That was really, those recordings weren't released for some time, from my understanding. But when they were reworked, that song became Never Learn Not to Love. That Dennis Wilson had contributed to. But it's just hard. It's weird to imagine probably one of the worst people that we know of, at least within our frame of reference in this world, recording music with a very popular band of the 60s.
Well, it was the 60s, as they say.
His legacy, obviously, Charles Manson, has lived on, again, for better or for worse. I think most people, anyone who watches any kind of true crime or reads up on the culture of that era, or who's interested in things like, even though he wasn't a serial killer, I think they sometimes lump him in with that kind of group.
He doesn't have many peers in his, whatever you would call him, cult leader.
Right.
Murderous cult leader. Yeah, he's kind of his own thing.
He's like David S. Pumpkins.
It's his own thing.
And yeah, I would completely agree that there's no one really like that. You don't think of him as fitting in with that group. But I think it's a kind of fairly well-known little... You're at the pub trivia, and you kind of know that the whole Charles Manson and Beach Boys recording. But you can still find copies of the recordings. Actually going to be creating a playlist on Spotify that'll cover some of the music on sound samples that we'll discuss on the podcast. So I'll leave a link to that in the bio, but definitely check it out if you want to hear some of those songs.
Yeah, later on, as tastes began to change, it kind of became in vogue for people to resurrect some of those Manson songs and record them. So I know Guns N' Roses did the tune "One in a Million," penned by Manson, and by the late 80s, nobody really cared anymore. It was kind of back to being cool.
Right.
That, this guy did this.
Yeah, and that's kind of a good example of why we're so disturbing. But I can, you get intrigued by that level of how different someone can be. That's a lot of evil in a heart, and I can see how people can kind of glom onto that and find it fascinating, even if it's repulsive.
Well, yeah, or even if they're involved and caught up in the middle of it themselves.
And that's it speaks to also how at that time we were going through a transition. It might even be what we're going through now. There's a big transition in youth culture versus the older ways.
Oh, sure.
Very similar.
Yeah, look at some of these TikTok and YouTube guys. I mean, not to say that they're an equivalency of what Manson was doing, but there's just a lot of schlock out there that people follow for reasons unbeknownst to me. That is this somebody that you'd really want to follow and put your faith into?
Oh, absolutely. It's a little scary, but you can see now that we have a way to get to anyone you want to with just pushing a couple of buttons, that there are people who have a platform now. And obviously, there's a lot of differences between it. I only have my lifetime and what I know of the past, but it does seem pretty similar. With the younger generations and doing some battle with the older ways.
Yeah, we're probably not too far removed here from somebody rising up the ranks and becoming a very popular online personality who then goes to do something nefarious in the real world that their legions of followers will support or also become involved in. That's probably right around the corner.
Yeah, I can see that. I even was just recently watching a video about the Parkland shooter who had created a video describing what he was about to do right before he did it. That might become a more normal thing. And if you have someone who's charismatic enough, who's saying the right words, we've already found out that people will believe whatever is put in front of them. As long as you have that right combination, it's just going to take one person like Manson to come along, and it's going to cause a lot of problems, even more so than the QAnon, which is already bothersome on its own. But, it's not all doom and gloom here.
Well, now I'm sad.
Yeah, I don't think we'll leave it like that. The world is ending, and everyone is sad. But obviously Charles Manson became a big part of pop culture. I mean, even now you can find T-shirts, books written about him, movies about him.
Well, he was American made. I mean, you can't separate American culture from the product it produces.
No, that's on. And I know that, and I don't know how long that will continue, maybe until, like we said, the next thing comes along, but still, especially in that era, if you're thinking about things that happened at that time, in California in particular, you're gonna talk about it. Which kind of goes into what we'll talk about. The most recent film by Quentin Tarantino, Once Upon a Time in Hollywood.
Yeah.
So I don't think we've talked about if you've seen it.
I've seen it.
Okay.
I've seen it.
I've seen it. Didn't get to it right away, but I watched it more recently with my second oldest in the room, and he's 12. And he thoroughly enjoyed it.
Family time video with some Tarantino.
I was not expecting him to sit through that much dialogue and exposition. He sat through the entire thing, and by the end, he was laughing maniacally.
Well, there was a lot of scenes with Brad Pitt smoking and with his shirt off, so that's what I liked.
That was good to see. Yeah, well, that just goes without saying. I was just not expecting that, especially because he has no idea who Sharon Tate was.
Sure, that whole story. Did you have to explain it to him?
I told him a little bit about it, but he was too excited about people being torched with flamethrowers. So,
sure.
It's something I don't, as a father, not sure how you likes. Well, some people are evil and they do terrible things. It's not always a good place to start that conversation. That's kind of reserved for separating from that as a film and then kind of just talking about it organically.
Now, did he know that this was based on real events, but this was sort of a blending of a fact and an introduction of fiction, and that it's a genre becoming more and more done today, but not always popular. So you take, how do we know something is real? We only know what the previous generation has told us about it. So news reports, and then it sort of morphs into its own things when it gets into the hands of writers and directors like Tarantino, where there's this what-if scenario of this terrible thing happened, but what if, spoiler alert, it ended differently, and Manson's goons got the wrong house, and they didn't go to Sharon Tate's house. They went to the guy next door, and he happened to have a flamethrower.
Right. And, I know the Disney Plus series, Marvel's What If, is running right now, but, for past few movies, Tarantino has kind of taken his version of history, this alternate history, and kind of said, again, what if things were just a little bit different? And I love that idea, this revisionist version of things told through someone who's all about pop culture. Yeah. I mean, it falls within a revisionist line, but
he doesn't try to say this is what actually happened. He lets you know that, hey, this is just a fiction in my mind that I thought would be cool to explore.
I know he got kind of lambasted a little bit for his portrayal of Bruce Lee.
Yeah.
From Bruce Lee's daughter. And obviously, larger fans.
Once again, this isn't something that really happened. This is just something that makes for a good scene in a movie. And I'm a huge Bruce Lee fan, and you have to be able to separate somebody doing something intentionally to damage a character. And Tarantino is a Bruce Lee fan too. I don't think he did anything out of malice. I just thought it was a funny scene.
Right.
And, like anything, people just get worked up about a lot of stuff that I don't think any intent there was to to make him look bad. It just, what if there was this stunt guy who got into it backstage with Lee
Right.
and threw him into a car?
Right. With this confrontation, would he be talking about how he was the greatest? And I know, I've seen in even older interviews and things, Bruce Lee, yeah, he did have that kind of cheeky, yeah, I'm the best, kind of like
Sure.
a Muhammad Ali.
Sure, yeah.
He didn't think he was better than anyone else, and he wasn't trying to say anyone was better or worse. He was like, yeah, I'm Bruce Lee, which was enough.
Which he was.
Right. But, yeah, I think it's interesting, with things like Inglourious Bastards and Django Unchained, and then Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. We have, as history goes on, we didn't live through World War II. We didn't live through slave era United States. But at least our parents were around for this time, and we have kind of a, like you said, Guns N' Roses, Recording Manson, knowing more about what happened. It's kind of a little bit closer to our time period, and knowing who Sharon Tate was and Roman Polanski. I think it's just really, really cool to see that side of things.
Yeah, it was a great movie. I thought that a lot of a lot of people saw it and maybe weren't impressed by it in comparison to Tarantino's earlier works, and there's something to be said about it, but still, all in all, great movie.
Yeah. And so what is your first connection you think of with early introduction to Quentin Tarantino?
Oh, definitely Pulp Fiction and Reservoir Dogs.
Yeah.
I mean, that was right around the time when I just thought a movie was a movie.
Yes.
I didn't really understand nuance in terms of what a film is. Like, I had seen what I thought were cool movies like Terminator 2 and, as a young 10 to 12-year-old kid.
Big Trouble in Little China.
Just fun movies where you understand that there's a plot and a completion and characters and elements. But it wasn't until I saw Pulp Fiction that I realized this is a whole different thing.
Yeah.
It can be done different. Natural Born Killers was another one where I said, wow, movies aren't just movies, they're a form of art. And very much those directors were very American directors. And I understand that people had hearkened back to maybe the French directors and the Italian directors as like the artistic directors. But as an American, those films by those American directors really resonated with me at a young age.
No, absolutely, and I think I'm the same way. It was definitely Pulp Fiction was, by the time that came out, Reservoir Dogs had come out, but it had kind of flown under the radar unless you were big into independent film at that time. Pulp Fiction was the one that blew up, got him on the map. I remember having a Halloween party and having people over at my house when I lived with my parents at the time, and we were going to watch scary movies, but someone had able to get a copy of Pulp Fiction on VHS. I watched that instead, and just like you, it kind of like rebooted my brain as to what movies are and how to tell a story, and had really never experienced anything quite like it at that time. You learn where his influences came from and things like that. But yeah, it was a new thing. Absolutely.
It's a perfect movie. There aren't many perfect movies. And that's one of them.
Yeah, it still ranks up there for me as just, there's movies that I remember watching. Another one you'll probably hear me reference 1,000 times over if you continue to listen to this is Goodfellas. I saw that. My uncle had gotten it as soon as it came out on VHS in 1991, maybe. And I didn't know, my brain didn't know how to compute it. I thought it was just a really long trailer.
That's what it feels like.
Yeah, and Pulp Fiction was very similar reaction to me. And then through that, I kind of went back and I watched Reservoir Dogs. And then when Jackie Brown came out, I wanted to see it because I liked the other two. And then so on and so forth of who is this guy? And
yeah, he's consistently put out great films over his career. Tarantino has, but I don't think he'll ever eclipse what Pulp Fiction was culturally in that moment, and just a watershed moment for modern American cinema.
No, absolutely not. And I just love that was a time, and again, something we're not seeing as much. I think a lot of things that are experimental, that are different, that are independent, are going to television now. Mm-hmm. Television is becoming more cinematic now. And the theater and film is reserved for a very specific type of movie. Now, I love the Marvel stuff. I have a lot of fun with that. I love going to see the new Star Wars in the theater. I'll go see Halloween Kills when it comes out. But I do kind of miss going to see an interesting, quirky, independent flick.
Yeah.
And we have areas around us that we can go see that kind of stuff, which is great, which I love that people still do, but it's not, I think it's losing steam.
Yes, it is. It's you kind of being outpaced by the big action blockbusters. And Spielberg was talking about this too, where he felt a few years ago, he said in an interview where he felt that in a few short years there will be even two different types of theaters. Your big IMAX sort of big budget theaters for these movies, 3D type action movies. That's almost like a thrill ride. And then you're just regular old projector movies, your art house movies. And they won't even really be, it's apples and oranges at that point.
Yeah, I would not be surprised if that ends up happening. And that's, it's fine if we can continue the traditions. I don't like people. Something you learn. Going to movies is often a headache. I think people, stay on their phones. They talk during it. They're just rude. To me, going to a movie is an experience.
Tuesday matinee.
That's
when you go. There's about 8 other people in there.
And that kind of thing is perfect. And I really, so I can appreciate what Quentin Tarantino, Robert Rodriguez, Scorsese still does it, and then there are a slew of other independent filmmakers,
too many to even
that
mention.
are kind of carrying the tradition, but kind of changing it up a little bit to be more television oriented. I still kind of have passed the torch a little bit, but. Especially in our age group, Tarantino was the one and he captured the late 60s at that time. Sure. Once Upon a Time in Hollywood.
Did you see where this interview came out where I guess his mom, Tarantino's mother, was kind of, when he was young, and understandably so, maybe I could see her point of view, but he just had a penchant for wanting to write movie scripts, and the rest of his academic life was suffering, and she sort of put her foot down and sort of said, hey, this little movie writing career of yours is over. And he had vowed from that point forward to just never to give her any sort of compensation for when he became successful.
Yeah, that's just one of those things that I think one paper picked up and it kind of just got passed around, and just I did check that out. I thought it was.
He's an intense dude,
right? And
apparently he pretty much held true to that.
Yeah,
I could see a little 8-year-old, 10-year-old Quentin just me and like,
oh, I ain't gonna do that.
Fuck you!
I'm not gonna do that.
And that's kind of what he did. But he's been into movies obviously since a young age. He wanted to write, and he even got into acting.
Yeah,
when he was younger.
So I know he worked in a video store. There was He wanted to be part of the movie world in any way through writing. He did provide screenplays. You had mentioned Natural Born Killers. And that was, even though that was directed by someone else, before he was directing, he had done True Romance. You can tell when I know he did Punch Ups on The Rock.
Yep.
And before that, though, he had an early acting gig, or acting roles that he did, not many. From what I understand from a recent interview, he pretty much dressed like Elvis 24/7. He got his hair done at a place that specialized in rockabilly haircuts. He dressed in the...
Back when he had hair.
Right. And dressed a certain way. So it wasn't a surprise when he got a call for an acting role on an episode of The Golden Girls.
Is that right?
Yeah. It was, I believe, season 4 that this happened. You can find the YouTube clips online. I'll see if I can link it in the description here. There's an episode where Sophia's getting married. I don't want to spoil it for everyone who hasn't watched through season 4 yet. It's a big plot twist. She marries the smoke monster.
It's the Red Wedding.
Right. Really came out of left field. And, there's a little mix-up, as there often are in sitcoms. And a group of Elvis impersonators show up to the wedding, and one of which is Quentin Tarantino.
Young Quentin. And so that is how we got from the Beach Boys to the Golden Girls via Charles Manson. And Quentin Tarantino.
And again, those are those connections that we just loved. I really hope that, you maybe you think the same way. Maybe you've thought about these things before. Maybe you're not borderline crazy and have never thought about these things. But
it's all connected.
So we're going to be continuing on here. We're going to do some other topics, some other subjects.
A lot of ideas.
If you have any connection to anything related to what we've talked about today, the Beach Boys, or Charles Manson, Quentin Tarantino, Golden Girls, please feel free to check out our social media or email popcultureconnection@gmail.com, or Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, and so on. And I really hope you check out that playlist that we talked about. We want to hear from you. Again, first episode. We're going to go from here, but we want to talk about your connections too, and maybe share them in further episodes.
So until then, stay connected.